to you. Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. I hope that you're having a great and wonderful Wednesday. It is the Wednesday that wins, and I hope that you are having a great one so far. We are back in our Boundaries books that we have been reading for Wednesdays, and I'm going to show them to those of you who may be coming in for the first time. The books are Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself, and Drama Free, A Guide to Managing Unhealthy Family Relationships. We are doing both of these. We're reading both of these at the same time, and we've been trying to work our way through the concepts since last season, by the way. So let's see where we are now. We are on how to successfully communicate a boundary. And we looked at step one and step two on last Wednesday. Step one was to be clear. Step two was directly state your need, request, or just say no. And step three was dealing with the discomfort that happens as a result of setting boundaries. That is the hardest part. Dealing with the discomfort that happens as a result of setting boundaries. So, what are some of those discomforts? Well, it's common afterward, after you set a boundary, to feel guilty or afraid or sad or remorseful or even awkward about setting and establishing a boundary, but they are needed for you. So, let's talk a little bit about what to do if you are feeling guilty, what to do if you are feeling fearful, what to do if you're feeling sad, remorseful, or awkwardness. And then we're going to move to our second book after that. Dealing with the discomfort that happens as a result of setting boundaries can sometimes be the hardest part. When it comes to guilt, the question I'm asked most often is, how do I set boundaries without feeling guilty? There is no such thing as a guilt free boundary. Guilt is part of the process. Guilt typically happens as a result of thinking that what you're doing is bad or is going to cause some problems. It comes from your programming about telling people what you need or want. From the moment many of us were born, we've been made to feel guilty for having wants and needs. But some adults care for children by forcing them to ignore their boundaries. Unintentionally, caregivers may force children to do things like hug adults that they don't want to hug. When children don't comply with the demands of their caregivers, they're told, "You're being mean," or "That's not nice." Telling children they're bad or mean for not complying with a request is essentially manipulative. But in these small acts, we start to teach children that they should feel guilty for attempting to honor their own boundaries. For example, when an adult says, "Hug me," and the child says, "I don't want to give you a hug," then the adult says, "Well, I'm going to feel so sad if you don't give me one." The intention is to evoke guilt. Some children are trained to be seen and not heard. We've often heard that phrase over the decades. They're taught that asking for what they want or having healthy boundaries is disrespectful. As adults, then, they might find it difficult to shed this outdated way of thinking. You might be called a troublemaker or the difficult one as a result. But the bottom line is that it is okay for you to ask for what you want. Stating your needs is a healthy part of relationships, and you can speak up for yourself without being disrespectful. Guilt isn't a limitation to setting boundaries, it's a feeling, And like all feelings, guilt will come and go. Try not to treat your guilt like the worst thing that ever occurred. Instead, embrace it as part of a complicated process, just one piece, not the entirety of your experience. So, how do you deal with guilt when it's present? Feel the guilt, but don't focus on it. Over focusing on emotions just prolongs them. You can carry on while still feeling guilty. Have you ever been excited about something? Of course you have. You didn't stop everything you were doing because you felt excitement, right? You didn't miss work. Maybe you didn't stay in bed all day. You did whatever was usually on your schedule, but you still felt excited at the same time. You can also carry on your life even while you might be experiencing feelings of guilt for setting boundaries. So, if you're feeling guilty because you have had to set a boundary recently, here are some reminders. Number one, it's healthy for you to have boundaries. Number two, other people have boundaries that you yourself must respect. Number three, setting boundaries is a sign of healthy relationships. And number four, if your boundary happens to ruin a relationship, your relationship was probably on the cusp of ending anyway. Finally, if guilt is bothering you, engage in your favorite self care practice and do a few grounding techniques such as breathing, meditation, or other grounding exercises for yourself. Now, some people might not want to set a boundary because fear might be the result. With fear, we tend to assume the worst. Some people say, well, if I set this boundary, they're going to find it to be weird. They're going to start acting weird with me. They might even shut down. I might not hear from them again if I set this boundary. Of course, we don't have any way of knowing up front how somebody else is going to respond to us asserting our own boundary. When someone has a history of something like rage or anger, though, it is understandable that we might want to avoid setting limits with that person. But we victimize ourselves further when we let fear prevent us from doing what we need to do. When making our expectations known, we worry about saying the right thing. The right thing is a matter of stating what we need through our assertiveness. Now, I do want to put a caveat here because a person who might have a legitimate fear, if the person has a history of rage, if the person has a history of anger, if the person has a history of abuse of any kind, then that is a legitimate fear that setting a boundary with this person might trigger them into some sort of violent action. In that case, you might want to distance yourself physically from that person before you go into setting a boundary. Um, Today, we are not talking about politics. We're actually talking about boundary setting. So, we're going to stay on topic today. All right. In Eric's case, we went over hypothetical scenarios as to how his father might respond to him setting a boundary. Eric had feared the worst. His father was yelling, name calling, and hitting walls. After all, his dad had gone into rages into the past for lesser offenses. Eric could not think of a time when anyone had imposed any boundaries on his father, much less his children. Still, Eric acknowledged that his mother had imposed house rules that his father had abided by, such as taking his shoes off at the door, not smoking in the house, and going to church on Sundays. He hadn't thought of those as boundaries that his father had accepted, but he could think of other rules that his father had adhered to even at work, in social spaces, with other members of the family. These realizations allowed him to see that his father was capable of honoring limits when he wanted to do so. And I think we can say the same thing about people in our lives that when we see them honoring boundaries in other places, but we see them not respecting our boundaries, that can key us into whether or not that person actually has respect for you personally and wants to continue on in a relationship with you. So when you see the fact that, hey, they can follow directions over here, they can respect boundaries over here, why can't they respect mine? I call that a yellow flag. All right. Another reaction that you might feel after you set boundaries with someone is sadness. You might not want to have to set this boundary with a person, but because of their behavior, because of their attitude towards you, it might be necessary. Some people say this, well, I just want to be nice. I just want to be nice. I want to be known as the nice person. I don't want to have to address the fact that this person is violating my boundaries. We might feel sad because we assume that setting a boundary is going to hurt someone's feelings. We assume that people might be unable to handle it. But this is also worst case scenario thinking. What if you present your boundary and what if they can handle it? What if they actually say, I've been wondering whether or not I've been crossing the line with you. And thank you for bringing this up and thank you for clarifying what your boundaries are so I know not to cross it. Bear in mind, too, that you have no way to guess how someone feels, so wait for them to tell you. Don't just assume that they're going to get upset. Do what you would typically do in the relationship. If you talk to a person daily, call them the next day. Assuming that the energy between you will become weird will create the exact uncomfortable tone you wanted to avoid. So assume that people will honor your boundaries and act accordingly. All right. So remorse comes up. Did I say the wrong thing? Sometimes we wonder if we went too far in expressing our boundaries, right? Awkwardness. Things are going to get weird between us now that I've set this boundary. But stay grounded in the understanding that setting boundaries does not make you a bad person, but a healthy one. Setting boundaries does not make you a bad person, but a healthy one. So, ways to communicate your boundaries. I don't know about you, but I have had problems with certain people in communicating, right, my boundaries. All right. In current relationships, identify the areas in which you need limits. State your needs clearly. Don't explain yourself or provide a detailed story about what's behind your request. There is a tendency for us to want to over explain why we're setting a boundary in the hopes that people will be more understanding, but sometimes they won't be. Be consistent in upholding your boundary, restate your needs when necessary. In new relationships, mention what you want in conversation as you're getting to know people. Have an open discussion about why having your needs is met is important to you. Be clear about your expectations. The first time someone violates your boundaries, let them know that they did. Sometimes we think, okay, this person violated my boundary. I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm just going to brush it off. But then they do it again. So what happens? The first time someone violates your boundaries, let them know that they violated your boundary. And then restate what you need for them to do. Also, expect the same thing from the people that are around you and that are in relationship with you. I like to tell people, and I like to check in with people too. Hey, are we okay? Are we good? Especially if you haven't heard from someone in a while that you normally have been in conversation with, you've normally been calling each other or texting each other or DMing each other, or if you have an in person relationship with them, you might notice that, hey, you haven't been speaking to me lately, or you haven't been coming around and saying hi, or I haven't seen you. We've been getting lunch together. I haven't seen you in a little bit. Check in with that person and say, hey, are we okay? Is everything all right? I just want to make sure everything is good with us. And sometimes people will say, well, I have been having some issues. Make sure when you check in, though, that you have time to hear back from them. That if there's an issue, you have time to hear what that issue is. Or you can say, oh, there is something happening. Let's set up a time to meet, or let's set up a time to talk so you can share your heart with me about what's going on with you. But always check in with people, okay? Next time, we're going to talk about boundaries with difficult people. How do you handle boundaries with difficult people? A lot of us are in workspaces with difficult people. Right now, I'm not in a workspace with a difficult person, but I was. And there are some people you might have to use some other tactics with them when it comes to setting your boundaries. All right, we are looking back again at Drama Free. This is Dr. Tawab, her book for family dynamics with setting boundaries. So if you're looking for, the other one was about individually setting boundaries. This one is more talking about family dynamics and dealing with boundary setting in families with dysfunctions. This is the chapter Thriving and Surviving. And she's talking in this chapter about how to move from being a victim and disrupting that pattern. And good morning to those of you who are coming in. One of the things she says here that I want to pick up from the last time, she said, teaching yourself what you were never taught is one of the most powerful ways to become a cycle breaker. Even if we were not taught something growing up or in our childhood, now that we're adults, we don't have to stay in a state of ignorance. We don't have to stay in a state of unlearnedness, I guess you could say. We can make the decision to learn what we were never taught. And I think I gave the example last time of cooking and how growing up, I had not learned how to cook because I was very clumsy and my mom wanted me nowhere near the kitchen. Well, now as an adult, I have learned how to cook. I cook very well. I like to experiment with cooking, um, and I like to learn new things when it comes to cooking. I could have just said, well, I don't know how to cook because my family never taught me, therefore I never learned, therefore I still don't know how to cook. So we have a responsibility in our own lives to take account for ourselves, to eliminate excuses about things that we never learned, and to begin to learn those things so that we can grow. The next subject she has here is be your own best teacher. First, look within to understand what isn't working in your family's dynamics. Trust that you know when something doesn't feel right and when something isn't working for you. There's no need to wait for validation from others. The most important question you need to answer is, what do you want for your life? What do you want for your family life? Bear in mind that what you might want may not currently exist in your family. What you might want might not currently exist in your family. You might be the first person in your family to make healthy relationship choices. And actually, this really should be a list. Make healthy relationship choices. Make your own decisions. Set boundaries. Hold people accountable. You might be the person in your family that gets labeled as the black sheep because you are always holding the people accountable in your family. Just raise your hand like this if you have been seen to be the person that's always holding people accountable for doing things they shouldn't be doing in the family. You might be the first person in your family to attend college. You might be the first person in your family to not attend college. You might come from a family where everyone has attended college, right? You might come from a family where everyone has attended college, and because you're choosing not to, that might cause friction. College might not be for you. You might be the first person in your family to not practice religion or practice a different spiritual tradition. You might be the first. You might be the first to challenge the status quo in your family. You might be the first in your family to choose to not get married or have children. I can't tell you how many people right now are making that choice. and it's sending their family dynamic spiraling because they're making that choice and they're feeling pressure from their older family members to say, why aren't you getting married? Why aren't you having children? And every time they meet up with their family, those two questions are being asked. You might be the first in your family to get married. You might come from a family dynamic where no one is married, where everyone just, has children and nobody married the father of the children. So there's nobody married in your family, and you might be the first one getting married. That's a whole other dynamic that a lot of people don't talk about. You might be the first person in your family to be openly LGBTQIA. That might be causing some friction. You might be the first person in your family that goes to therapy because you might have been told therapy is for wimpy people, or therapy is for people who are not strong, or therapy is not a masculine thing to do. I've heard some weird stuff about therapy. All right. So you might be the first person doing that. You might be the first person venturing into therapeutic practice. And you might be the first person in your family to actually be addressing your trauma head on and not saying, well, they did the best they could and I turned out all right. You, ma'am, and sir, probably did not turn out all right. The science shows that lots of brain damage has been happening to people who did not turn out all right. And they haven't been willing to address it. Okay. So be your own best teacher. Recognize where you are in terms of your own family dynamics. Recognize what actually are you doing that's different from your family dynamics, and recognize the impact that that might have on your current family and the younger people that are coming after you that are looking for an example. They might be looking to you as the auntie or the uncle or the cousin or the niece that decides to do something different than the family dynamics. And when you're stepping out and doing something different from your family dynamics and you're having a positive impact on your younger generations, that can definitely cause friction for some people because they want to be seen as the hero. And you're breaking the hero mold in the family. You're doing something outside of the box. So that could be causing friction. Now, last section for today. Preventing dysfunction when you see similar characteristics in yourself. OMG. Has anybody looked up one day and said, I feel like I sound like X, Y, and Z? I sound like my mother. I sound like my father. I sound like my grandmother. And sometimes what you're hearing coming out of yourself is not necessarily a positive thing, but you find yourself repeating some of the phrases that you grew up with, or you find yourself repeating some of the behaviors that you saw. For example, getting angry and throwing and breaking everything. Maybe you saw that growing up and you didn't think that would ever be a part of your personality, but you got angry one day and you just start picking up stuff and throwing it. Yeah. Or getting upset, walking away from a relationship, walking away from an argument, going somewhere and getting intoxicated. You didn't ever think that that was going to be a part of your storyline because you saw it growing up, but now it's a part of your storyline. So, what do we start doing when we see similar characteristics happening in ourselves that have happened in our family? When you grow up in a dysfunctional family, it can be hard to know what is and isn't dysfunctional. Don't blame yourself for not knowing better. Strive to become more aware. Awareness allows you to see what you need to change. You might find yourself emulating the behaviors of people you don't want to emulate, which can lead you to change because it's easy to see exactly what you want to work on. But awareness alone will not change you, only action will do that. All right, let's see. There we go. Changing who you are as a result of your environment looks like some of these things. Acknowledging the things that you want to change. You may find it helpful to make a list of patterns or issues in your family that you want to change within yourself. After looking at the list, think about how the issues currently affect you and how you exhibit some of the same behaviors that you don't like in others. This is part of what some people would call shadow work. This is the work that is not glamorous. This is the work that you might not see on in a television show. This is your own personal work that you have to do. I know for me, one of my big issues was alcoholism. Um, my mother dealt with alcoholism and is dealing with alcoholism. So all throughout my life, I saw what alcoholism did to my family. I didn't have to see a commercial. I didn't have to see an anti-drug campaign. I lived through what alcoholism could do to a family. Um, so I started drinking when I was a young person. Like I was drinking around 13. I started drinking. Now I was not drinking socially. I would just drink at home because there was plenty available for me. But I would drink privately with myself. When I started seeing what was happening with my mother, it made me want to say, I don't think I need to keep doing this because if I keep doing this, I might wind up doing what she's doing to us. I might wind up doing that to other people. My final, I'm not going to do this anymore, almost took me dying for me to stop. Now, that's not the place that most people want to get to, right? You don't want to get to a place where you almost die because you're doing something that is destructive and dysfunctional to your life. But I almost died. I've had drinks at my sweet 16th birthday party. And again, I was not a social drinker, so I was drinking just alone. I had drunk some, I think it was Jack Daniels. It was like a little pint of whiskey. And nobody knew that I had drunk it because, again, I was not a social drinker. So I was not drinking in front of other people. I was just drinking. So I drank it. I went out poolside. They were setting up for my party. We were all kind of getting ready, doing balloons and all of that kind of stuff, blowing things up. And I was standing at the edge of a pool, and my friend came over. She was excited to see me. We started kind of horse playing a little bit, and then she pushed me into the pool. Now, she knows that I could swim. I know that I could swim, but I didn't realize that I was drowning because she pushed me into the pool and I was standing at the bottom of the pool. And the only thing I remember was the water is blue. It's very, very blue down here. I didn't realize that I was drowning. I didn't realize that I'm standing in water and I probably should not just be standing in water just looking at it in the pool. Well, that was the last thing that I remembered. The next thing I knew, somebody was on my chest and doing this, and then I was spitting up water from the pool. So I almost did not make it to my 16th birthday. And that was enough realization for me. I know some people have had multiple near death situations, but for me, that was enough. I was like, okay, I will not be drinking anymore. That was like decision for me. Um, I never wanted to be that intoxicated or that not in control of my systems and my senses to realize that I was drowning. I was alive, but I didn't realize that I was drowning. So for me, that was my wake up call, my personal wake up call that I will not be drinking. Now that's not to say that I didn't experience other things in the future, in the very near future, that tied into that. But my conscious decision was I will not be getting myself any drinks. I will not be drinking. I will not be pouring myself alcohol. And to this day, I do not drink. That was a personal decision that I made. And so, again, acknowledging the things that you want to change. Hopefully, you don't have to have a near death experience to get you to change some things in your life, but hopefully, you can acknowledge the things that you want to change. The next thing she has here is owning your issues and not blaming yourself. In the past, you didn't know what you didn't know. Now that you're becoming aware, take ownership of the opportunity to change. Indeed, your family will be impacted, but if you aren't making changes, you're choosing to perpetuate the status quo. You're refusing to change what you can. At that point, it's no longer them, it's you. Make small steps towards doing better. It won't be healthy to make a complete life renovation at all at once, but in small ways, you can start changing what you say, what you think, and your personal actions. Lastly, today, if your childhood was unhealthy, as an adult, you can create a family of loving and supportive people. You can set boundaries around how you will allow people to show up in your life. You can choose the relationships from your family of origin that are worth maintaining. You can find role models outside of your family and learn from them. You can establish new traditions. You can take and use parts of your childhood that were healthy and discard what you need. And you can find community among people who are also healing from family dysfunctions. All right, that's where we're going to stop today. Excellent book. I highly recommend that you check it out for yourself. I want to thank you today for your time and attention on YouTube. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so continue to go out and be light. If you want to join us for the talk back that we're going to have in a moment, you can join us on our IG, which is at Daring Dialogues, all one word. Take care, be well, and most importantly, be light.